When a living organism becomes disconnected from its roots, it loses the essential connection to its source of sustenance and inevitably perishes. Carl Jung dedicated his entire life to pursuing a single goal, described in his autobiography as the quest to penetrate the secret of the personality. He was inspired by the famous saying of the Roman poet Terence, adopting it as his guiding principle, "Nothing human is alien to me." Throughout this journey, Jung delved into the depths of the psyche like few before or after him, revealing a profound and unsettling realization: our ignorance regarding the true nature of the human mind. We live in times marked by an almost complete disorientation regarding the purposes of human existence. Now more than ever, we need a massive dose of psychological knowledge. In this video, we will explore some of Jung's most impactful discoveries about the inner world of the psyche. We will also analyze the meaning of one of his most famous phrases: "We must strive to make the unconscious conscious." Everything that resides in the unconscious seeks to manifest externally, and the personality also desires to emerge from its unconscious conditions in order to experience itself as a whole. The word psyche has historically been used to refer to various things: life, breath, soul, or spirit. However, Jung adopted a more modern sense of the term, referring to the mind in its broadest sense. For him, the psyche represents the inner world of mental experiences. When Jung describes something as psychic, he refers to the experiential nature of these phenomena, something that is part of the profound process of self-discovery. Jung classified the elements of the psyche into two broad categories: the conscious and the unconscious. According to him, we can consider the human personality to be composed of two parts: first, consciousness, and second, a vast, undefined territory of unconscious psyche. The components of the psyche that belong to consciousness are those we are aware of, that can be voluntarily controlled, reflected upon, and connected to other thoughts or ideas, creating networks of cognitive associations. On the other hand, unconscious elements operate outside the reach of consciousness. They are immune to the control of the will and cannot be easily reflected upon. As Jung defined, "I understand the unconscious as the totality of all psychic phenomena that lack the quality of consciousness." The division between the conscious and the unconscious is not rigid. On the contrary, it is mutable and in constant flux. There are not two distinct and separate realms, one conscious and the other unconscious, but rather a single psychic domain. To illustrate this relationship, we can imagine a spotlight moving across a dark stage. The spotlight represents consciousness, while the stage symbolizes the totality of the psyche. As the beam of light illuminates certain thoughts or mental processes, they become conscious. When the light moves away, those same contents return to the darkness of the unconscious. Jung adds to this vision by stating, "From a scientific point of view, unconsciousness is merely a characteristic of certain psychic phenomena. We cannot even assert that there is a fixed class of psychic phenomena that under all circumstances remain unconscious. Anything can become unconscious. Everything we forget or cease to focus on is eventually absorbed by the unconscious." Most of our psyche operates in a state of unconsciousness. Jung describes this relationship with a powerful metaphor. Consciousness, no matter how extensive it may be, will always be the smaller circle within the greater circle of the unconscious, a small island surrounded by a sea. He saw the unconscious as a vast territory, far beyond what we can consciously perceive. Jung divided the unconscious into two major spheres: the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious is made up of experiences and memories that belong to our individual trajectory. These contents may have once been conscious, but ended up relegated to the unconscious either through forgetting or repression. Some of these memories were simply neglected for not being relevant enough to the conscious state. Others, however, were repressed for being painful or not in harmony with the image we have of ourselves. As Jung clarifies, the personal unconscious contains everything that has been forgotten, repressed, or in some way kept out of consciousness, acquired by the individual consciously or unconsciously. This content bears an unmistakably personal mark. However, the unconscious is not merely a storage of repressed or forgotten memories. It also houses innate contents that do not derive from our personal experience, but from the evolution of our species. Jung called this deeper layer the collective unconscious. He called it collective because its contents and behaviors are universal, shared by all humanity. Unlike the individual psyche, the collective unconscious is formed by patterns and archetypes that exist in all human beings. As Jung described, the personal unconscious rests upon a deeper layer that does not derive from personal experience and is not an individual acquisition, but is innate. I call this deeper layer the collective unconscious because it does not belong to the individual, but is universal. It contains contents and behavior patterns that are the same everywhere and in all individuals. Jung referred to the contents of the collective unconscious as archetypes. He described them as universal and inherited patterns that together form the structure of the unconscious. Every person is born with a set of archetypes, just as we are born with physical organs. Just as organs predispose us to specific physical interactions with the world, archetypes predispose us to certain forms of mental and emotional interaction, shaping how we experience and respond to life's challenges. These archetypes function like channels through which the current of psychic life has always flowed. Jung often compared archetypes to instincts, stating that in the same way instincts unconsciously direct our physical responses, archetypes influence our psychological and emotional responses. In Jung's words, the innate form of acting is what we know as instinct, and for the innate form of psychic apprehension, I introduce the term archetype. For Jung, throughout most of human history, we have been largely guided by the unconsciousness of our instincts and archetypes. Consciousness, on the other hand, is a relatively recent phenomenon, and it emerged precisely from the unconscious. As Jung stated, the psyche is not something recent. Its roots go back millions of years. Individual consciousness, according to him, is like the flower of a season that arises from the eternal rhizome buried underground. As he explains in his complementary works, the unconscious is the basis and precondition of all consciousness. It represents psychic life before, during, and after consciousness. The question of why consciousness emerged from the unconscious is one of life's great enigmas, generating various debates. What is certain, however, is that this transition radically transformed the course of humanity. Consciousness elevated us from instinct-driven beings, guided by archetypes and innate certainties, to a species capable of doubt, questioning, and reflection. As Bernardo Kastrup describes in Decoding Jung's Metaphysics, animals that follow their instincts do not face dilemmas or difficult decisions. Instinct always points the right way, leaving no room for regret or anxiety about the future. In harmony with nature, they do not suffer from internal tensions. In contrast, we human beings have distanced ourselves from that instinctual orientation and fallen into the realm of fear and doubt. It is consciousness that brings us this suffering. As Castrop quotes, consciousness is what makes us suffer. Jung also reflects on this transformation. Man began in a state of unconsciousness and has always struggled toward greater consciousness. The development of consciousness is, at the same time, humanity's burden, suffering, and blessing. Although the awakening of consciousness has exposed us to suffering, it has also granted us immense power. While unconscious processes allow us to react quickly in familiar environments, consciousness gives us the ability to face the unknown, navigate new situations, and reshape the world around us. Consciousness enables us to think flexibly, to stay focused on a single problem for long periods, to anticipate possible futures, and to reflect on the past. This adaptive power is what distinguishes us as a species. Jung observed that the essence of conscious processes is adaptation. Therefore, consciousness goes beyond merely improving our ability to deal with the external world. It transforms the way we experience it. In a way, we have the power to choose what we place at the center of our consciousness, and what we choose to focus on directly shapes our experience of the world. Moreover, we can direct this attention in different ways, with a broader or narrower focus, with commitment or indifference. Depending on how we apply our consciousness, whether toward the external or internal world, our experiences can be radically different. In addition to shaping our perception of the world, the psyche also plays a fundamental role in the construction of our personality. The way we organize our consciousness, what we choose to bring to light, what we leave in the unconscious, and our ability, or lack thereof, to connect with the archetypes of the collective unconscious are crucial factors that define who we are. To transform our personality, Jung believed it is necessary to alter our relationship with the unconscious. This means that by bringing the elements of the unconscious into the light of consciousness, through reflection and integration, we expand the field of our perception. This expansion of consciousness brings us closer to the state of psychological wholeness, the ideal of mental health, according to Jung. The first step in this process of integration is to illuminate the aspects of the personal unconscious, especially those we repress because we consider them unpleasant or undesirable. These repressed traits, often characterized as weaknesses or character flaws, make up what Jung called the shadow of the personality. The shadow is one of the most accessible parts of the unconscious, since many of its elements were once conscious. For most people, the shadow can be revealed through honest self-reflection and the willingness to accept that we are rarely as virtuous or moral as we would like to believe. Few people have the courage to face their own shadow. Most prefer to deny their flaws and weaknesses, believing that ignoring them will make them disappear. However, such denial does not eliminate these dark aspects. It only allows them to act outside our control. That is why it is much more beneficial to recognize and accept our imperfections, as doing so reduces their negative impact on our lives. Jung's experience with psychiatric patients revealed another benefit of confronting the personal unconscious. We often repress not only our weaknesses, but also our strengths. Due to inadequate upbringing or distorted social values, we were made to believe that those traits were defects. By illuminating the personal unconscious, we can reintegrate these strengths into our conscious sense of identity, which allows us to build a more complete and balanced personality. The personal unconscious is something relative and can become so restricted that it almost disappears. It is possible for a man to develop his consciousness to such an extent that he can say, "I am a human being. Nothing human is alien to me. There is yet a third reason to confront the personal unconscious. Only when we descend into this layer of the psyche can we access the deeper elements of the collective unconscious. As Jung observed, this personal unconscious must always be dealt with first and brought into consciousness. Otherwise, the path to the collective unconscious will remain closed. Accessing the collective unconscious allows us to come into contact with the vast wisdom accumulated throughout human history. Jung believed that archetypes function like guides, shaping our responses to the universal challenges that we all face. Among the best-known archetypes are figures like the mother, the father, youth, old age, and the hero. There are also religious archetypes that connect us to the sacred, and the archetype of the self, which helps us in the quest for psychological wholeness. As Jung explained, although life situations may seem infinitely diverse, they follow patterns that repeat over time. These archetypal patterns correspond to typical events that we all experience. When we go through moments of great distress, the archetype related to that moment emerges in the unconscious, and its transition into consciousness is perceived as an illumination or a saving insight. In decisive moments of our lives, such as when we are about to begin a new chapter or face great challenges, necessary archetypes may spontaneously manifest in the unconscious. In such cases, we are driven by strong emotions and unconscious orientations, being guided by the goals of the activated archetype. However, modern man faces an obstacle. His way of life often blocks this spontaneous activation. The constant distraction provided by technology reduces our field of attention, preventing the perception of unconscious content. Moreover, our obsession with personal image and social validation creates barriers with the shadow, obstructing access to the collective unconscious. Disconnection also occurs due to the absence of activities that could expand consciousness, such as art, spirituality, or contact with nature. Jung emphasizes that the function of making the unconscious conscious operates automatically. But due to the loss of natural instincts in civilized man, this function often weakens, being unable to withstand societal pressures. That is why he argued that, throughout history, artificial tools have always been necessary to activate the healing forces of the unconscious, allowing these beneficial energies to surface. For modern man to reconnect with the unconscious, it is essential to strengthen the symbolic function of the psyche. It is through the manifestation of symbols or psychic images generated by the unconscious that we become aware of the archetypes. When a group of symbols emerges in consciousness, they reveal the meaning and purpose of the archetype to which they are associated. A term or image is considered symbolic when it goes beyond its literal or immediate meaning. It carries a broader unconscious aspect, something that can never be fully defined or explained. A classic example of an archetypal symbol, according to Jung, is the mandala, which represents psychological wholeness. This symbol, reflecting unity and completeness, often emerges during moments of chaos or psychic confusion. Jung observed that the mandala helped restore order to a fragmented mind. He described the case of a patient on the verge of psychosis who began drawing mandalas spontaneously. By externalizing this archetypal symbol through art, the patient brought the archetype into consciousness, which helped her recover mental health. Thus, archetypal symbols, when revealed in consciousness, act as catalysts of self-transformation. Sometimes the impact of these symbols is so profound that they compel us to follow unexpected paths, driven by the force of the archetype. When the archetype manifests through appropriate symbols, which doesn't always happen, it can take hold of the individual in a surprising way, creating a condition almost like possession, whose consequences are unpredictable. One of the best ways to connect with the collective unconscious is through dreams. During sleep, consciousness weakens, allowing archetypal symbols to emerge freely. However, most people ignore or quickly forget their dreams upon waking. Jung recommended that those interested in exploring the unconscious should record their dreams and reflect on their meanings, trying to decipher the symbols that appeared. As he stated, I spent more than half a century studying natural symbols, and I came to the conclusion that dreams and their symbols are not trivial or meaningless. On the contrary, dreams offer the most fascinating information if you dedicate yourself to understanding their symbols. In addition to dreams, religious practices play a fundamental role in accessing the contents of the collective unconscious. Meditation, chants, hymns, and contemplative prayers are tools that help expand the focus of attention, allowing archetypal symbols to emerge into consciousness. Religious rituals, which are collective experiences, can facilitate the activation of these archetypes, connecting the individual with deeper dimensions of the psyche. Reading sacred texts, mythologies, fairy tales, and great literary works offers valuable knowledge to interpret the symbolic contents that these archetypes carry. When we access the archetypal realm of the unconscious, we are inevitably transformed. Our personality develops towards psychological wholeness, and we begin to live with greater authenticity and lightness, attuned to the ancestral wisdom that has shaped human history. As Jung noted, touching the personal unconscious already transforms you, but accessing the collective unconscious changes you even more deeply. You become someone different, distant from the condition of those who have never explored it. On the other hand, if we continue repressing the elements of the personal unconscious and remain disconnected from the symbols of the collective unconscious, we will continue to be limited, insignificant in our psychological stature, without reaching our true potential. A society that ignores the wisdom of archetypes and sinks into a unilateral and distracted consciousness is doomed to collapse. Archetypes, when neglected, do not disappear. Instead, they find destructive ways to manifest, intensifying emotional states that can lead nations to war, incite mass persecutions, or trigger psychosomatic outbreaks that devastate the social structure. Jung warned that if an archetype is not brought to consciousness in a positive way, there is no guarantee that it will manifest beneficially. On the contrary, there is a greater risk that it will emerge destructively. According to Jung, the human psyche developed the capacity for consciousness precisely to avoid these dangerous regressions and to prevent the destructive potential of archetypes from wreaking havoc in our lives and societies. This might be the end of the video, but to me, it feels like the beginning of a great friendship. I want to thank you for staying with me until the end. It truly means a lot. I hope to see you in the next one, where we'll explore the mysteries of life and human nature together. Until then, take care, and see you next time.